Hello and welcome to another News for You live stream brought to you by Freedom Media WA. Since the Labor Albanese government has come into Parliament, you, like many Australians who are feeling the cost of living noose tighten around their neck more and more, that's making it cost prohibitive to run household appliances. So you'd be forgiven if you haven't seen on TV about the government's proposed draft bill to kill free speech. Public submissions close on the bill this August the 6th, and it seeks to introduce law that will end the current ability you enjoy airing that free speech. Joining me now is the federal parliamentary member for the electorate of Monash, and that's Russell Broadbent MP, a parliamentarian who has himself recently been subjected to censorship for simply asking a question in Parliament. There is a proposed bill by the Labor Albanese government that will seek to apply the same type of censorship experienced by Russell Broadbent, a current sitting member of our Australian Parliament, but worse, and with huge fines and even jail terms. It's called the Communications Legislation Amendment Combating Misinformation and Disinformation Bill 2023. Russell Broadbent, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak to those that follow Freedom Media WA about this Orwellian type and very disturbing bill that you find yourself having a voice all the way over here in Western Australia, because we no longer have politicians on this side of the country prepared to speak up like you are on this. Russell, jumping straight into this matter, why are you being so outspoken about this bill?
Well, Lindsay, we came out very early on this because it's such a worrying bill. It means, for someone like yourself, for instance, that if you were classed as mainstream, you'd be exempt, which is great. But if you weren't classed as mainstream, you could be taken down at any time because of the words you might use, such as ivermectin or something like that, any other word. But more importantly than that, anybody commenting on what you've said on your program can be taken down.
Yeah,
it's not just freedom of speech here. It's actually control of the media. Lindsay, control of what you're doing, and with huge fines.
And I think you mentioned when you say media, and it really is, you're referring to mainstream media. In fact, I think the bill is referring to that as professional media, which means small independent media platforms like, as you quite rightly point out myself, are going to find ourselves really wanting to know what is next. Do you see, Russell, that this is a genuine attack on free speech?
Absolutely it is, because if you don't have free speech, you don't have the right to say something that is wrong. I mean, and so many times over in history have things been said that were seen to be wrong at the time that proved to be absolutely correct in the long run. And the use of ivermectin is probably one of the clearest, award-winning drug that is cheap and effective, and yet it was taken away from the opportunity to have that. That's only one thing. You surely, people in this country have a right to be wrong, and then we argue that out in the public arena, whether somebody is right or wrong. But they should have the right to say it. I remember there was a member of Parliament who was not a friend of mine, Lindsay, but, well, actually was a friend of mine, Albie Schultz. Albie Schultz was a meat worker that came into the federal parliament as a member for Hume. And I remember at the time we had a very controversial issue of me saying that refugees that had been in detention for a long time, and we charged them, Lindsay, for their stay in it, and they came out of detention with great fines over them, which means if they married into the Australian community, those refugees had this bill to pay over their heads. So they couldn't get a housing loan, they couldn't get loans, they couldn't, and if they married just another Australian, the two of them were stuck. So I put a bill into Parliament to remove that. Now, Albie didn't agree with me, but he stood up in the Parliament and he said, I don't agree with what Russell's doing. And we achieved it, by the way. We had all the expenses, according to them, abolished. But Albie said in that speech, he said, I don't agree with what Russell's doing, but I certainly agree with his right to say it. His right to put a proposal before the Parliament, before the Australian people. And that was just an amazing event for me, because this wasn't a great intellectual. This was a man that I respected very highly, who'd come out of the toughest industry in Australia to be a federal parliamentarian, the member for Hume. And I was so proud that moment, not of what I was doing, but rather his defence of free speech in Australia and free opportunity to put a case forward. And that needs to be the case always, because you saw the mainstream media in regard to the vaccines go totally and absolutely along with the government line, and they were ordered to do that. And many of the mainstream media were actually paid money to promote the cause that the government was putting forward. So the minority in Australia, very few of them who decided that they weren't going to take the vaccines, they were just not allowed to be heard, not allowed to be interviewed, not allowed to be spoken to. And so it was only the online media that was giving information out to the general public that gave us an opportunity to speak.
And Russell, I guess what rang alarm bells for myself is, and this isn't so much, a lot has happened in the last 2 years, as you know, and you've identified a few points as a result of the pandemic. But the speech that I referred to at the beginning of this stream was you asked a question in Parliament as to why the government would not want to explore the excess death rate in the last couple of years. Now, setting aside whatever the outcome or whatever people's perceptions of that particular issue, what may be the cause of that, this is not so much a discussion as to get to the bottom of that. It's simply yourself, a member of Parliament, posted that question that you posed in Parliament on your YouTube channel, and it was struck down by YouTube.
That's correct. I was asking the question about excess deaths in Australia, and just last night, Tasmania came out with figures from the ABS that said that Tasmania have a 17% increase in excess deaths in Tasmania. And so, you know, a variation might be 1, 2, 3 or 4%. But when someone like myself sees a variation of 15 to 17%, you have to ask the question, why? That's all. Ask the question, why? So we asked the question in the speech of the overall numbers in Australia at that time, which was about 18%, I think it was at the time, increase in excess deaths in Australia. It's a parliamentary speech, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, I think it was. It's in the Hansard of the Australian Parliament for anybody to read. So on YouTube, it was taken down because it didn't fit their community standard.
And I do recall seeing on The Outsiders that you took steps to try and explore exactly what community standard it was that was breached. Have you had a definitive answer back on that?
No.
So then...
No, there's no appeal or redress for what they might be doing. Nothing.
Yeah,
if they want to take you down, it's their platform. You're out.
And herein lies the problem, I guess. The appeal process, because I've been subject to that a number of times myself, is a tick and flick type sort of process. And as you mentioned, the fines around that, and that is one of the things that the bill is looking at doing, is perhaps putting the onus back on the social media companies to, in essence, self-regulate. So then that can open the door to the companies, because I think the maximum fine is up to $6.8 million or thereabouts, and for larger corporations like Facebook, about 5% of the annual turnover. So potentially, if you take last year's data, Facebook could be, on a breach of this, be looking at about $8 billion, which means they, rather than looking at what's clearly is misinformation, if it's borderline, they're not going to take the risk. They will self-regulate, I would suggest, and they will take down people's posts.
Absolutely they will, because they're not going to take that risk that they would be fined. So they'd err on the side of safety for themselves which means that freedom of speech is out the door. It would only be what they would allow, Lindsay, what they would allow, as opposed to anything that opposed the narrative of the day. That would be the end of it. They just say, no, it's too close to the wind, you're out.
As a long-standing member of federal parliament, you've been sitting in parliament for some 20 plus years, perhaps.
Yes.
Have you ever seen anything of this nature that is causing you the concern that the public really should know about this?
Not in my 25 years as a parliamentarian. Not once have I seen anything as terrible as this legislation is. Lindsay, I'd have to say to you that any attack on freedom of speech is an attack on our children and grandchildren, because if we can't say it now, this is as it was put in Julian Quill, I think, in an article yesterday, the day before, in the paper said, this is only one brick in the freedom of speech wall.
Because this absolutely is about moderating content. What they're talking about here is making sure the big tech delete and remove the posts that ACMA, that is the government in my view, don't want there, that they think is false, that they think is not accurate. ACMA won't be writing to John Smith in the suburbs and saying, please remove your post. They won't be doing that. What they'll be doing, without John Smith knowing, is going to John Smith's social media platform and having John Smith's post removed by the platform. So absolutely this is about moderating content. It's ridiculous to suggest otherwise.
What's the next one going to be? And the next one and the next one, until there's no freedom of speech here in Australia. What has happened over the last 3 years and the lack of information given to people about their own lives, their own bodies, their own opportunities, their own responsibilities has been really damaging for freedom of speech in Australia. And I would hope that this legislation never comes to light of day. It doesn't get to the parliament because there's so much furor around it. And Lindsay, you and I are not on our own. There's Henry Ergas in the Australian. There's been a number of professors that have written on it. And they're all saying this must not go ahead. This must not go ahead. Because if we don't have people like yourself online, well, what have we got?
I guess we have a government-controlled media by trying to impose hefty fines on social media platforms that everybody nowadays has access to. It's a great way to get information out there. And so we certainly have worked very hard in this platform to try and keep things as factual as we can, but we just don't know. There is a couple of parameters that they talk about, you know, if there is an impact to health, but it's not just health and it's not just pandemic related. It could be in religious discrimination or a speech or something or a point of view, an opinion that you make in relation to your religious beliefs. They may not be radical, but they may be relevant to your faith. And we still don't know with the draft bill, from what I've been able to determine, who is going to be the arbitrator that will decide what is misinformation and what is not.
Well, to go back to the providers, they would have to decide first whether something is misinformation or is not misinformation. That would be correct, wouldn't it? So therefore, the bureaucrats are deciding what is misinformation and what is not misinformation, and they're sitting behind a desk, and they may have no interest in your hobby or your personal decision on your life or what the imam may have posted from his sermon or what the Christian right may post from their sermons in, you know, here in Australia and around America. And they can say, well, in our opinion, what that particular preacher is saying is misinformation. And you're stuck, and there's no redress. You're just taken down again. So, yes, you're spot on. I hope the people of Australia, just like your amazing farmers have in Western Australia, they've just put their foot down against the Indigenous Land Bill that's just, kicked in Western Australia.
The Aboriginal Heritage Act amendments?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And the Western Australian Farmers Federation have just done a wonderful job in presenting that to the public as it is, the truth about what's happening. Yeah. So they could be taken down. The Western Australian farmers could be taken down because they perhaps went on a program like yours or put out their own post.
Yeah, and that is of great concern. And we certainly have spoken to John Hassel from the WA Farmers Federation. We were going to be heading down to Albany. Unfortunately, we couldn't quite make that trip. It's quite a distance away from here in Perth, Western Australia. But since the government information sessions have ceased, the Act has come into effect, as you know, the 1st of July. But what you're talking about is farmers in unprecedented numbers have come together. I think a couple of days ago there was a public forum, a meeting held, and there was over, if you're talking about 200 farmers, that might not sound like a substantial amount, but when you talk about the sparse and the distance that those farmers have to come to one point to air their concern, that's a lot. It's a lot of land that produces not only for Western Australia, not only for Australia, but also overseas grain. Our grain has a very good reputation on the international market, and they have concerns going about their daily business. And simply by posting a comment that may be contrary to the government narrative, can see that taken down.
That's right. Look, you have to forgive us Victorians. Victorians do not understand in Western Australia when you say it's just down the road a bit too far. They have no idea how far that is. I've driven from Albany up to Perth.
Yep.
And it's a long way. And then I went on to Geraldton, where my daughter was a journalist in Geraldton.
Yeah.
So we love Western Australia, but nobody over here understands the enormity of the travel times in Western Australia. So yes, the 200 farmers to come in, they can be from 200 kilometres away.
Oh, and some, and you're talking, as you mentioned, Perth to Albany is 450 kilometres, and your daughter in Geraldton, that's also 450 kilometres the other side, heading further north.
Correct.
So, you've got 900 kilometres right there just to get from down south.
You've got 200 farmers coming in, and the enormity of the size of the properties.
Absolutely.
That's a big number. That is a big number of people.
Yeah, and a lot of real estate that they're responsible for. It's their livelihood, and not only that, it's a lot of the produce that we see on the table. It comes from these farms in Western Australia. Can I ask you, in terms of the birth of this particular bill? I mean, my understanding is that the Australian Communications and Media Authority did table a couple of years ago something around censorship of this type of nature, that the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison did agree to some of those changes. Would you have forecast that it now would have morphed into this draft bill?
I have absolutely no doubt of that. The only thing, Lindsay, it never came to the party room as far as I know. There was a small article in the Financial Review of what the Minister, Paul Fletcher, was suggesting at the time. But I cannot remember. This bill, if it came to the party room, would never have got through. Would never have got through. And that they were targeting was purely around COVID.
Yeah, and we've seen as a result of recent Senate estimates or Senate committee hearings that the federal government has been caught for wanting for censoring some over 4,400 odd particular posts on Facebook during the COVID period. But if we just set aside COVID, just talk about the censorship. If that happened back then, under this potential bill, as you say, it's the fight for children, because this, once bricked in, the walk back will be incredibly, incredibly hard. People are looking at potential jail terms for if they want to go that far.
Well, if you consider this in its entirety, if people do not have the chance to put a view forward that is not the mainstream view, and they do it through social media, well, they're going to be taken down very, very quickly. So they're not going to have a chance to say anything. And we know that, I don't want to repeat myself here, but we do know that things that have been said only 2 years ago, there will seem to be absolute misinformation that I said on ABC have turned out to be factually correct. Because the ABS figures are now in. They're there for everybody to be seen. So it's people like myself could not get their message out, even though it was given to federal parliament. And even though, I mentioned that there was some, we put up a post every week. I put the post up, Lindsay, and we paid to boost it, and Facebook rejected the boost. They just said it wasn't up to community standard. So the normal viewers, they didn't get a chance to see it.
If you talk about the particular YouTube post that was taken down, breach of community standards, asking that question about the excess deaths, that's one thing. My understanding also, Russell Broadbent, is that you have been subjected to censorship for simply talking about the way that you want to live your life, and you subscribe to vitamin C, for example.
Yep.
My nan was a nursing matron, and she always used to say, the moment you feel a cold coming on, up your dose of vitamin C, 2-3 days before, 2-3 days after. Potentially, this bill around, let's take COVID, around that type of subject by saying, look, personally, this is how I manage colds and flus and things like that. That could be deemed misinformation, and that
absolutely. I'm a promoter of vitamin C, D, and zinc, or anything else that's recommended by a naturopath for your health and well-being. And going right back to your nan, she knew what she was talking about. In other words, let your own immune system be the strong system to knock off the respiratory illness. She knew exactly what she was talking about, and she would have seen it work on so many people and within your family. So, Lindsay, I've just got to say to you, thank heaven for your nan, because all the things that she put forward are still right today. But if you went on and said, if you've got a cold, just take vitamin C, sorry, you're out. You would not be allowed to say that, because, you're not talking Panadol or, deep heat rub or some other, remedy that the big pharma have got.
This really is the potential impact and implications of this is beyond it. It's almost incomprehensible. And this is the general public. What would you suggest? How can they potentially air their grievance in relation to this?
I know there's a website you can go to, but that's rather complicated. What I think you should be doing is contacting your federal members and senators with a letter or with a phone call to say this isn't on. They're the ones that are representing you. So in your state, you have Labor members there, you have Labor senators there. It's very important for them to get the message that this bill should not go ahead. It is against human rights, and it's against the Australian way of life and the way we live life.
Without, I guess, so much telling the public how to make their submission, how would you sort of suggest, or what suggestions could people say? I mean, is it really a case of saying, I have concerns about this bill, I feel it is an attack on free speech, and I really feel if you support this, I'm letting you know that I won't be voting for you come next federal election? Is it as simple as that?
Yeah, and that's how aggressive you have to be. Because this affects you whether you vote Labor, whether you vote National, Liberal, or Independent or Green. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
This will affect you. And this will affect your opportunity to even put forward a proposition that might be a political proposition. I mean, you have seen people in Canada, you saw, without social media, we wouldn't have known, the truck drivers having their credit cards stopped.
Yeah,
having their bank stopped. Farage in England is now fighting a case against a bank who took his bank accounts away because they didn't like what he was saying. Now, they've since apologised, but that's exactly what we're up against here. And I don't like corporations telling me what to do. I don't like airlines telling me how to live my life. I don't like mining companies telling me how to live my life or how to vote on certain issues. I think that's up to the Australian public, how they make up their mind. Very important. Let me say this to you. You can ring up their offices. You can send them a letter. You can send them an email. But put your name on it. Put your name and address and phone number on it and say, if you want to talk to me about this, ring me back. Because politics respond to all of those things.
Do you feel, what's the sense Parliament's not sitting at the moment, because we wouldn't be doing this interview if it was? Where's the coalition on this in relation to, are you able to give some sort of indication of what your party room colleagues feel?
Well, I've written to Peter Dutton, Lindsay, and had a very good response back from Peter. They haven't taken it to shadow cabinet yet, or shadow ministry, and they will be doing that in the next week. I think there'll be a very strong negative response to this bill coming from the Dutton-led coalition. I know the National Party are already on the side because David Littleproud has let us know in no uncertain terms what he thinks about this bill. Barnaby Joyce has come out against the bill. Many politicians have come out against the bill and responded to my pleadings to them to wipe this bill off the pages of the earth. And by the way, Lindsay, there's a bill like this all around the world at the moment. So it's not just coming out of Australia. You know, it's in every country all around the world. They're trying to do this sort of thing. And Australia is very independent. Not as independent as Western Australia is, but very independent. And we should be taking a lead here in keeping our voice protected. That is the general public's voice. Us, we the people, have an opportunity to state our piece, even if it's wrong. And I remember in my first years in local government, Lindsay, and I'll finish on this, I often moved motions, and there were 12 councillors, and I lost them 1 to 11. But years later, those same motions went through. Wasn't patting myself on the back, but at least I had the opportunity to state my case all those years ago. And we need to give people always the opportunity. They say, why do you get on so well with certain people, like Wilson Tucky? Well, you know, he and I had a great relationship because Wilson had a point to make, and he was very, very good quite often. Sometimes he wasn't, but a lot of times he was spot on. And so, you know, I'm very appreciative of people who have a different opinion to the rest of us. And if you come from Western Australia, sometimes you have a different opinion, and it's not the mainstream opinion. And I like to see the opportunity for people to have the right to speak in this country, even if they're wrong. And the punters will always work it out, Lindsay. They'll always work it out.
I think very well said there, Russell Broadbent, in relation to that. The punters will work it out. I'm not sure, personally, I don't like using the word punters, but I get the saying. It is a colloquial expression. And I guess if we think back to the birth and origins of social media, it was an ability and a place, you know, to formulate a town square discussion without going to the town square, the modern day town square.
Yeah.
But that will be no longer is what we're potentially looking at. Can I just finish on this and ask you this? The Communications Minister, Michelle Rowlands, has come out and said that this is not an attack on free speech. What do you just say to that?
Well, Henry Ergus says it's an attack on free speech. There must be at least 20 commentators that are saying this is an attack on free speech, because they know if they get away with this one, there'll be another one next following it up. That's the problem, because it's a slippery slope from here on in. If the people of Australia don't stand up and have their voice heard on this one, their voice will be unheard of into the future. It was social media that says that virus came out of the Wuhan lab, and they were absolutely, you know, torn to pieces for saying it. And it was misinformation, and it's turned out to be absolutely correct. Thank heaven for platforms like yours. The people always get it right.
And thank heavens for, I guess, for members like yourself sitting in federal parliament who have brought this to the forefront, the attention of Peter Dutton. And as you say, it seems like there is some promising indication there, although it hasn't gone to the party room, as you said, for a formal vote, that there is, that he's taken heed of the concern, as you've aired. So certainly from this side, it's a long way, as you know. We certainly echo the work that you've done on that front, and it's very much appreciated. I'm sure that those that follow this platform will understand this and hear your message that that this is a call to arms for many of the reasons that you've just said then. So on that note, I guess, Russell, I would like to, again, thank you very much for your time. There's some fantastic things. I think what you've just said then really drives it home.
Well, I think I've got more coverage when YouTube took me down than if they just left it alone. So that's where we're at, Lindsay.
Wow.
Thanks for having me today.
Yep.
If the Parliament was sitting today, I'd still be talking to you. We'd find a way.
Oh, wow. So it is a bit of a privilege to have somebody of your standings with your insight come and talk to an independent platform like this. And hopefully this won't be the last time. Australians need to take a stand. Russell Broadbent, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Brought to you by Freedom Media WA, where journalism should...